Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning. I'm happy to be back at the ENHR because as a PhD student I went to the Young Housing Researchers Colloquium in Yevle in 1992. So it's a long time ago, but good to be back at the ENHR. I will tell something about the situation in the Netherlands. The plenary is called Policy Approaches for Overcoming the Crisis. Well, I think at this moment we should not look at the Netherlands for the policy approaches which are being followed to overcome the crisis, but I will show them anyway. I will tell something about the policy change in the 1990s, because it's good to know how the model works in the Netherlands. The role of the housing associations before the crisis, the effects of the economic crisis of 2008. There were some scandals with the housing associations in the Netherlands. I will tell something about that. And I will tell something about the changes in policy on the European and the national level from 2010 onwards. And I will also show some alternative strategies during the crisis. I will show some examples of the Amsterdam region to show how these changes in European national policies affect the local level. First, the Netherlands still has the highest percentage of social housing in the European Union, about 32%. 2.4 million dwellings owned by private, non-profit housing associations. In the big cities this percentage is even larger, so in Amsterdam 47% of all the housing stock is owned by these private, non-profit housing associations. The majority of the housing in the Netherlands is owner-occupied, about 60%, and in Amsterdam that's about 30%. If you look at the city of Amsterdam, this is a map of the city of Amsterdam, and all the colors show the different housing associations which are active in the city. And as you can see, the social housing is in fact spread all over the city, and even in the higher status district, like the south of Amsterdam, the percentage of social housing is still almost 30%. And because the sector is so large and so spread over the city, there's less stigmatization than in many other countries. And still some middle income groups live in social housing. But that will change, and I will tell something about that later. This is one of the reasons why someone like Susan Veenstein calls Amsterdam a just city or undivided city, because it has such a large social housing stock. Also, for instance, in Eiburg you can see on the right side of the map this artificial land made on the water, the Dutch tradition. That's our new neighborhood, still 30% social housing. These are these 8 housing associations in Amsterdam. They are our members, so I work for the Amsterdam Federation of Housing Associations, which is the corporation of all the housing associations. Together they own 193,000 dwellings. And that's within the city of Amsterdam, because some of these organizations also own dwellings outside the city of Amsterdam. So in total they own more dwellings. In the 1990s we had a radical change in the housing policy. The national government said that we didn't have a quantitative housing shortage anymore, so it was not necessary anymore to subsidize the construction of new social dwellings, according to the government. And also it was the time of the European Monetary Union, and the national government wanted to reduce the state expenditure. So what was done in an operation which is called the grossing and balancing operation, or brutering in the Netherlands, that all the future subsidies were exchanged against the loans, and that was a 17 billion euro operation carried out in 1 year, 1995. And from that moment on, the housing associations were completely financially independent and didn't receive subsidy anymore. They also became developers, also of owner-occupied dwellings, private rental dwellings, etc. and they worked according to a revolving fund model. The profits they made on the market, they invested again in social housing. You have to know this background before we can tell the effects of the new policies. The change in the national, let's say, the tenure mix, you can see in this graph, after these changes in policy, the owner-occupied sector grew from roughly 40% to 60% now. Percentage of social housing decreased from 39% to about 32%, and private rental also decreased some. These are national figures. These are the figures for the city of Amsterdam. As I told, it's a large social housing stock, so it was almost 60% social housing in the end of the middle of the 90s, and now it's 47%. So it's decreasing, and it's decreasing because the housing associations sell dwellings. The new construction is for 70% market, owner-occupied and private rental. And we have urban renewal where social housing is demolished. So that's why the reason why this social housing percentage is declining. I told something about the new construction. This is Eiburg, 30% social housing, and the policy is accessibility for all income groups in all the neighborhoods. And still the housing associations construct about 70% of all new housing in the city of Amsterdam, and that's including the owner-occupied dwellings and the market rental dwellings. So it's not true, not like that the change led to a decrease of the role of housing associations, because they also carry out the market activities. Urban renewal also changed because, let's say, before the 90s it was completely dependent on subsidies of the national government and municipal government, but from the beginning of the 90s, this new phase started, where the housing associations had a big role in the restructuring of especially post-war neighborhoods like the Bijlmermeer. And Bijlmermeer was our most infamous high-rise estate with many socio-economic problems and a lot of about 25% empty vacant dwellings in the 1980s. So it was decided that something had to be done, and the policy was creating a more mixed neighborhood. There was almost 80% social housing there by having more owner-occupied dwellings and more market rental dwellings. And it was done by the demolition of half of these flats in the Bijlmer. So half of the high-rise were demolished, and they were replaced in part by private or low-rise dwellings, mainly in the market sector. This way, let's say, more mixed neighborhoods were created, and also the satisfaction of the inhabitants of these neighborhoods, of the residents, increased. At the moment, we cannot carry out this kind of urban renewal anymore because of the economic crisis, but I will come back to that later. But this is an example of the way it went before the crisis. Well, the economic crisis in 2008, of course, the fall of Lehman Brothers, etc. Only in 2008 we already had a drop in the sale of new dwellings of 30%. So there were also reduced revenues from sales and new development, and that meant a negative influence on investments of housing associations. And that you could put, for instance, in these urban renewal areas, it was usually a mix of market housing and social housing. In the Netherlands, you start constructing when 70% is sold of all the dwellings. So it meant that because no dwellings are sold anymore, almost since the crisis in these areas, construction doesn't start. Also, sometimes not from the social housing. But anyway, despite all this, in 2010 and 2011, still the housing association delivered more than 60% of all housing in the Netherlands, while the market housing completely decreased. Of course, in the Netherlands, our number of startups in 2012 of new construction is on the lowest level since measurement started, but it's not as bad yet as in Catalonia, with a 90% drop, but it's a lot lower, maybe something like half. Okay, the economic crisis, so it affects really the policy, the life in Amsterdam and construction. Scandals and control. Of course, after the 90s, the scope of housing associations broadened. They carried out more and more activities, both market construction, area development, but also livability, neighborhood approach. And many of these things were done on the request of local governments. So it was not only in the market field, but also in the social policy and livability fields. Some housing associations had some financial mismanagement, for instance, when buying land, which they couldn't develop later, and these kind of things. But the largest scandal was the acquisition of derivatives by Vestia, the largest housing association in the Netherlands, which led to a 2 billion loss. And the other housing associations, all the other housing associations have to compensate for that for about 700 million. Another thing was the high salaries of the directors. Many directors of housing associations earn more than the prime minister, and the politicians don't really like that. So there is a parliamentary inquiry which is already started in the system of housing associations and the things which went wrong, and it will go on from now until 2014. But yeah, we have to say that all these scandals amounted maybe to 20 housing associations and not the other 380. And so as a result of the scandals, the whole sector has a very bad image in the Netherlands at the moment, and especially with the national politicians. Then I get to the role of the EU. There's so much to tell, so it's difficult to do it in 20 minutes. But the role of the EU is especially apparent in economic competition policy. And the EU thinks either in terms of state or market. And housing associations are hybrid organizations who both work in the state and market. Dutch housing associations, as I told before, don't receive subsidies. But their loans are guaranteed by the Housing Guarantee Fund. And the housing associations have a solidarity fund. If some housing association gets into financial problems, it can be compensated by the entire sector through the Central Housing Fund. The European Union considers the Guarantee Fund, which guarantees the loans of all the housing associations, as state support, because they can get a lower interest rate because of that state support. And from the economic competition point of view, state support, of course, from the EU line of reasoning, should be aimed at a specific group. So one of the measures which was taken was to delimit the target group of social housing in the Netherlands to 34,000 euros before tax. And if the housing associations don't allocate 90% to this group, they will lose their guarantee of this fund. This fund is very important because I think about almost 90 billion of loans are backed up by the fund, and this fund has a AAA rating. I don't know for how long, but still it has a AAA rating. The measure of the 34,000 entering the social housing sector, so not for sitting tenants, but entering the social housing, was applied from 2011. Another thing which was carried out was that the housing associations have to separate their activities in social and the market activities. And the national government wants to carry out this even further, that housing associations will not be allowed maybe in the future to carry out these market activities, which may mean the end of the revolving fund altogether and the end of housing associations as hybrid organizations. Another thing, and that is something where Hugo Primus gave a presentation about in the workshop, about the landlord levy. We have a government of conservatives and social democrats now, and the landlord levy is a tax, or it's a levy on housing, and it will amount to 1.7 billion per year in 2017. And this is an enormous amount of money for the housing associations, and it means, in fact, that they are not able to invest anymore. And the way that the government makes it possible for housing associations to earn this money is raise the rents. Well, the first step is higher rents for higher income people in social housing. So people with an income below 34,000, they get a yearly increase of 4%. Between 34,000 and 43,000, 5.5%, and higher than 43,000, 6.5% rent increase per year. That's one thing. Also, in popular areas, it's possible to ask a higher rent. For a very long time, that was not possible. And this is the same as this levy is about 2 months of rent per year. So in the end, the renters will have to pay this levy. And then actually you get a sort of paradox, because the government asks a levy and housing associations have to ask a higher rent for that. It may become not affordable for some groups, but at the same time the government says, yes, housing associations are only for social housing. So it's a paradox. We call it a block paradox because our minister is a block. Anyway. The guarantee fund made calculations about the effects of these new measures on housing associations, and it will lead to higher rents from 430 to about 530 in 2017 on average. And the construction of rental dwellings will really decline, so it will really go down. What we also see is that we get coalitions between the local governments and the housing associations, because for a very long time the local government and housing associations work together on neighborhood approach and many other fields, and now actually national governments more or less makes it impossible to carry out these neighborhood approach activities. And 90 aldermen of the Social Democrat Party of the local governments, they wrote a letter to the ministry that they are against this policy. But the Social Democrats are also in the national government, so it's also a discussion between local and national, which maybe sometimes in Spain also be an issue. Yeah, here's what we see, what happens in the Amsterdam case. Let's say in 2008 in Amsterdam, more than 5,000 dwellings were constructed. We are now at roughly 2,500. The red shows the housing construction by the housing associations. You see it's between 50 and 60% of all housing in the city. And the green, the social rent. And we calculated that as a result of this landlord levy, about 5,000 dwellings in Amsterdam will not be built. So this will go down even further. We will not be in the Catalan situation or Spanish, but we think, well, the housing associations were doing reasonably well, but with this landlord levy, it's almost like it's impossible to invest anymore. Maybe there are some light points. The crisis also, makes us sometimes leads to creative solutions. One thing, of course, is what to do with vacancy. In Spain also, of course, you have a lot of vacant offices, vacant dwellings, and in the Netherlands we don't have a lot of vacancies in the housing market. We have a lot of vacancies on the office market, 17%, and so there's something we can do with that. I showed the example of the Bijlmermeer. We will have far more renovation instead of demolition, and what we also see a lot malls, smaller urban studios, and self-building. Self-building is something which is quite more common in Spain, I think, than in the Netherlands. Transformation of office buildings, some examples. This is a building called het Gakgebouw along the highway of Amsterdam, the Ring Road. It was a social welfare building, very large, and now it will be phase by phase changed into student apartments, both for sale and for rent. For sale about 90,000 euros for about 30 square meters. The prices are still high, but okay, it's transformation. Because first the plans were to demolish this building, but now it will be reused. That's, I think, part of the change. These are some examples. Another thing is the urban renewal of the Bijlmermeer. The last old Bijlmer high-rise standing will not be demolished, but it will be sold. Thank you. I only have 0 minutes left. It will be sold to the inhabitants for about 1,000 euros per square meter. So that's for the Amsterdam. It's a very low price, and they can renovate their own dwelling. I will go. This is the flat. I will go to the end. Self-construction. And maybe some lessons. Landlord levy creams off extra income. We get a more means-tested social housing in the Netherlands, I think. And some general trends. The role of the European Union from broad to means-tested social housing. From new construction to transforming the existing stock. More self-construction maybe. And yeah, coalitions between housing associations and local governments. Creative use of vacancy. These are some general trends from the Dutch case. Thank you very much.